This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. Dan Lynch and I are talking on this show with Breck of MNM Mail, an alternative to email that will obsolesce mail, perhaps. Find out coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 623, recorded Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. MNM Mail. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Technology Powers X. Learn how technology is reshaping business through an original podcast from Dell Technologies. Search for Technology Powers X anywhere you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. And by Linode. Simplify your cloud infrastructure and cut your cloud bills in half. Get started on Linode today with $100 in free credit. Text TWiT to 474747 or visit linode.com/floss and click on the Create Free Account button to get started. Good morning, good evening, and good time wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another Floss Weekly. I am Doc Searls, and I am joined this week by my co-host Liam's a guest. I'm sorry, Dan Lynch. I'm
Hey,
steering ahead.
Yeah,
of my
good to
guide
see you.
thing. There. So, Dan, you're in Liverpool or someplace like it?
Very nearby, yeah, very close to Liverpool, yeah. Just a few miles out of the city centre, actually, yeah. So northwest of England, way over the pond there.
Yeah, I was thinking before we started, and I started screwing up. Okay, I have to call you Dan, not Dan. Dan is so American, but it's Dan.
I'll answer to either. I don't mind.
That's like I'm in a place that the English call Los Angeles, which sounds like a language.
We do,
but it's actually Los Angeles. So our guest this week is Breck of MNM Not Mail. Have you looked into this yet? I'm looking forward to the show. I've talked with Dan. I've talked with Dan.
So
Liam earlier.
I've had to go through the demo today, and I've been trying out the client on my laptop, which is kind of next to me here as we're talking. Seems really, really interesting, yeah. So I can't wait to get into it and find out more about the ins and outs of MNM Not Mail.
Excellent. So because we're getting a little bit of a late start, I want to rush ahead and let everybody know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Technology Powers X, an original podcast by Dell Technologies. Each episode of Technology Powers X focuses on a different industry and goes behind the scenes to help you understand how technology is reshaping business everywhere. I just think it's the coolest thing that a podcast is sponsoring a podcast. So that's the new thing for me. I love it. And I know a recent episode features researchers who are studying the architecture of the human brain in an effort to develop more versatile AI models. Another episode explores the world of professional esports, featuring a behind-the-scenes look at Team Liquid and their star CSGO player, Allege, spelled E-L-I-G-E, but pronounced Allege. And one episode talks about vertical farming and how innovative new tech can change where our food comes from and how this may be the future of sustainably feeding 21st century populations. Technology Powers X is hosted by Danielle Applestone, a hardware engineer and entrepreneur. If you're a pet lover, check out episode 14, The Best Partner for Pets. Here is a clip.
Yet today, technology plays a growing role, not just in happy reunions, but as an invaluable tool to America's animal welfare workers.
Search for Technology Powers X anywhere you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. That's Technology Powers X. Download it today. My thanks to Technology Powers X for their support. And on with the show. Our guest today is Breck of MNM Not Mail, which is a new thing for me and I know for Dan. So first tell us, Liam, where are you coming in from, just so we can locate things in the world?
Good morning. I am currently in Menlo Park, California.
Yeah, I used to live next door in Palo Alto for some number of years. So tell us, give us sort of the top level of MNM not mail, because it's mostly about not being email, and there are lots of reasons for that. Just give us the top level, and then we'll start digging into the particulars.
Sure thing. So it's I call it MNM. And the tagline is MNM is not mail. So it's an acronym that references itself. And one of the biggest issues in our world today is the rise of organized cybercrime. It's doing tremendous damage to individuals and corporations, and probably the most threatening, or the portal by which most cybercrime reaches you is email. A technology that was invented in the 70s and 80s. So the system is essentially destructive. We're sort of hooked on this communication system, which is undermining individuals and organizations all the time.
So we, like a lot of geeky people, I've been on email for many decades, and I've taken it totally for granted. I mean, just speaking as an individual, I mean, the record of my life is probably more embedded in email than in any other record I have. I can search back through it and the rest of it. But I also know, because I did operate my own email server for years, that, what is it, maybe 99.x% of all email traffic on the internet is spam. It's not what people want. Security and stuff like that was never built into it in the first place. And then at one point, I found that because one of the people on my server, one of my siblings, had a very weak password, and for that reason, somebody got in there and set up a porn site, and I had to go in there and scrape that out of the server.
Oh, man.
So it was, and at that point, I just put it all. I found a cloud service that I could put the server on, and that took care. They're filtering the spam. They do a pretty good job. It's not, it's Rackspace, it's not Gmail. But anyway, what I like about what you're trying to do is you seem to be rethinking the whole thing from the inside out, from the individual outward toward everybody that they're communicating with, and basically starting from the assumption that there needs to be a better way, or at least another way. And so maybe if you could tell us a little bit of your own backstory of how you got going on it, that would be helpful.
So I wrote an article about this, which was published at Changelog, and that's on my Twitter feed, which has the same address as my website. But quickly, I was working on a hardware device, a pocket server, a Linux pocket server. I imagined that it would be the size of a credit card or a key fob that you would put in your wallet. And you'd be able to walk up to any device that you'd already interacted with, a laptop, a phone, a wall screen, a smart pen, and your pocket server would see that device over the local wireless network, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and give you all of your apps and data on any of those screens or devices, anywhere you went, and let you share them with anyone else who you wanted to share them with in that room. And that project was called Anvil, and it never reached beta, because building hardware, if you've never done it before, is excruciatingly hard. However, I was also working on some software for that device, which was based on the idea of people building what you could call local webs, a collection of interlinked documents that you have locally and that you share with other people who then have them locally. And the prototype that I built for that became the foreground work for MNM.
That's an interesting way into it, Liam. I was thinking of what you talked about there with the credit card sized computers. I was thinking of the gum sticks. Do you remember those gum sticks computers you used to call them? Or like a chewing gum, bubble gum stick thing that would have like a whole computer on it. I
do. And there were that gum stick was actually based on the same chip platform that I was using. There were any number of OMAP from Texas Instruments products, and which is one of the reasons why I thought it would be pretty straightforward to build or to commission to build my own version. So yes, gum sticks indeed.
Yeah, it just occurred to me in my mind. I don't even know if they're still around anyway. But we're not here to talk about gum sticks. Don't worry. I'll look into that on my own time.
Okay.
So so talking about MNM, then let me try and pronounce that properly. We might get some problems with my accent here because I sound incredibly British when I say MNM. I don't know why that is. But yeah. So I was having a look at it today. So you said already about this desire to kind of I'm trying to think of non-business speak words, but I can only think of like change the paradigm of email, or invert the paradigm of email. That sounds like marketing speak, and I apologize, but you know what I mean. That kind of idea of flipping it on its head. It's really, really interesting. So it seems to me a lot to do with, as you say, like private networks. So one of the big things behind the project, it seems, as so I've been playing with it, is you kind of pooling your kind of interactions into little groups, so I could have a trusted group of people in my company, and then I could have one where other people can join. Can you tell us a bit about the kind of ideas behind that?
Well, yes. So let me actually take this opportunity to diverge because a question you were looking for a way to put it that was less corporate sounding. Mm-hmm. I call it replacing email.
Right, yeah.
We need to actually replace email, and this comes across as crazy ambitious. And so people think that because people think that email is entrenched. And that's a fair assumption because it's widespread, and Ethernet, which is widespread, is entrenched. Ethernet is entrenched because it's hardware. Software only becomes entrenched if it creates valuable data or it requires extensive customization. And so, for instance, your browser has to be is extensively customized by every website it visits. And Microsoft Office creates really valuable data that people read and revise over a period of time. But messaging apps, email included, are not generally customized, and the value of their data evaporates within moments of receiving it. So that is why there are so many messaging apps in use today by so many people. We have Slack and Discord and WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Facebook Messenger, Mattermost. The list goes on and on. And MNM is really no more ambitious than any of those projects. I will just put in an aside to our listeners here. If you like anything that you hear, please tweet or blog or Reddit it. MNM is spelled with 3 letters, Mary, Nancy, Mary, and getting the word out today in this very noisy world, especially in the noisy world of messaging, is a particular and interesting challenge. So I invite everyone to throw their hat into the ring.
Yeah, definitely. We encourage people to do that. I mean, you're right. It's such a a busy kind of area, isn't it, messaging? Because there's so many people trying to do it. One of the things that I thought was interesting when I had to read about some of the philosophy behind what you're doing and the reasons for it and so on. And one of the things I thought was interesting was we'll get into the kind of layout of the server and the client and all that kind of stuff. And it was this idea that, so mail servers as we know them, I never really thought about this, but came about in a time where internet connections were not as good, obviously, not even as consistent. So having a server with a record of all the messages that your client could go and interrogate and so on was really important. And it creates a kind of attack vector. That seems to be one of the points that you were making in the documents there, which makes a lot of sense. So now that we have more kind of consistent and faster connections, it's kind of is the idea to kind of decentralize a bit, and so you're making sure that all the clients have a copy of the message, but the message necessarily doesn't have to live on a server in one place.
Yes, indeed. So we don't start with the assumptions that the designers of SMTP had to use. As I said, SMTP, which is the protocol underlying email, originated in the 70s and 80s when the internet looked completely different. Back at that time, there weren't hosting centers with huge connections and staffs dedicated to keeping all of the networking and all of the servers running. It was yesterday's internet was a patchwork of networks that were interconnected, sometimes intermittently. So when you pulled up a client app for email or for anything, an FTP client, and went to go to a website, you couldn't necessarily count on that website being accessible. Not that it might be down, but the link between you and them might not be working at that point. So SMTP was designed to do what's called store and forward, where it imagines hopping your message through multiple email servers. And today's internet, you just don't need to do that. If you have an internet connection at all, you can pretty much assume that you're going to be able to reach the service that you're going to. So given that, we can make, or CMTP, TMTP is the protocol underlying MNM. T stands for trusted. So that's client server and store and forward, and importantly, members only. So client server, it's not a web app. All of the sent and received data is stored on the client. Members only, or store and forward, the server doesn't retain messages after delivering them. And members only, you have to have an account on that server in order to connect to it. So in a corporate setting or in an organizational setting, the only members who are allowed to access a site for internal communications are your employees and your contractors. So that means that in an MNM context, you're typically going to have any number of accounts on different sites. And the demo, the online demo, actually shows that. Maybe you could put up an image of the online demo from the website. If you go to the demo page, then there's a button that says Open Demo at the bottom. The online demo, yeah, there we go. The online demo provides 6 different sites as examples and an explanation of why this particular user, called Jordan, has accounts on all of these sites. So I want to go back for a moment to another sort of fundamental issue, and that is the motivations for this project. There's 2 major motivations. Let me start with the big one, which I mentioned at the top. There are 2 really huge issues facing the world today: climate change and organized cybercrime. Now, cybercrime doesn't get the same press that climate change does, but if cybercrime during 2020 had been a series of natural disasters, they would have been 4 times worse in damages all of the weather and climate disasters of 2020. $945 billion in damages for cybercrime versus $258 billion for climate damages. Now, you could adjust either of these numbers up or down, but it's clear that the scale of organized cybercrime is on the same level, on the same tier as climate change. And I wish a large chunk of the technology community is fighting this struggle every day and basically losing, on the order of $945 billion a year worldwide. And when you're under attack, you have two obvious things to do. One, you can pull up the drawbridge. Two, if you don't have a defensible position, you can retreat. And email makes virtually everyone in your organization accessible to anyone on the internet without consent, without limits. So pull up the drawbridge. Stop doing internal communication on email. If the email protocol set didn't exist today and someone proposed it, they'd literally be laughed out of the room. It's an absurd set of standards. We're only using it because we're used to using it, and no one's come along to do anything different. So why is this the case? Well, phishing and email compromise are the two primary attacks that are being executed by email, and these are social engineering. And social engineering is really effective because it creates an impression of a pre-existing trusted relationship between the recipient and the sender, which of course doesn't exist. So you receive a carefully crafted attack in your work inbox. Your first reaction to that is, oh, I have a request from my manager or from my colleague. I need to go and fulfill that, or I'll damage my standing at work. So a really interesting example of this happened in Bangladesh a couple of years ago. An attacker, it's not known from exactly where, launched an email attack which convinced an employee of the bank to install malware, which then proceeded to execute a series of transfers from the bank's account at the New York Fed to a collection of banks and accounts in the Philippines to the tune of $1 billion. Just a brazen, astounding attack that would have damaged the economy of Bangladesh irreparably, or at least for a period of time. And fortunately, it didn't all succeed because, the attackers got something like $70 million. They would have gotten all $1 billion, but the New York Fed had a sanctions enforcement system that had nothing to do with Bangladesh or transfers to the Philippines, that just happened to flag these any number of these transfers for review, and so a whole bunch of them were stopped. If that sanctions enforcement system had been working correctly, all of those deposits would have gone through, and Bangladesh would have been severely impacted. So we're not talking, a few dollars here and a few dollars there, a small business with minimal security there and a small business there. These are big-time criminals with big-time targets. So I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, this is a great thread. I was thinking, as you were talking about the prior world during which the email standards were established. I mean, there was in the mid-'80s, I think, that SMTP and POP3, and then later, I think, IMAP came along. And we're still using those. And I'm also noticing, I took some notes here, you talk about phishing, email compromise, social engineering. These are artifacts of the world that we live in today. I was thinking in the early 80s, when the movie Blade Runner was made, and it looked at a future Los Angeles in November 2019. That's the first thing you saw on screen. It was November 2019. And, there were off-world colonies and replicants of humans, but they still used payphones and had phosphors on their vacuum tube screens. And it wasn't possible probably to imagine a world in which everything went digital. I mean, we are living in a digital environment now where, for example, getting clues from each other, just looking at each other and talking to each other about whether or not we're being cheated, whether or not somebody's being honest with us, all those other things aren't there. It's pretty easy
Indeed.
to
Yes.
conduct a phishing attack. You can fake people out really well
Exactly.
digitally.
Mm-hmm. Trivial. Indeed.
So I'm wondering, so let's say MNM not mail takes off. Okay, your dream is reached, and we have this other way of communicating. Where do you see it taking hold first and growing? Because I'd like our thousands of viewers and listeners to start imagining that out with us and putting it to use. Where does that go?
Sure thing. Yeah. So initially, the most likely adopters are organizations that are really concerned about phishing attacks. So manufacturing, public infrastructure, banking, research and development organizations, IT departments. If malware gets into one of those examples, then it might be game over for that company. So another example would be organizations like a family law firm that's exchanging documents with their clients, and they need to keep their messages off of their webmail clients.
Yeah. So, that brings you to think of a webmail client. Brings you to another thread we could go down here. Do you see?
Sorry, I wasn't quite finished.
You weren't done because you needed a drink. Carry on.
Right. So webmail applications read your messages in order to sell you advertising based on the content in them. So, like a family law firm wants to keep, and their clients want to keep that data out of that person's webmail record. So
I'm imagining if I wanted to start a company that was selling to law firms or to organizations where the vulnerability is high and the exposure is high, that's a business, right? I mean, that sounds like a pretty good business to me, and especially since the threat is there and it's already known, and in some cases experienced by a company, that would be a pretty good business to get into, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed. I've been working on this as an open source project because I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Would it be a business? So I think for this to be as successful as it can be, it can't be a startup. It has to be an open source project with a community around it.
Yeah. So that's our audience here. And so generally people working on open source projects either create something new because they want to scratch their own itch with it, or they jump onto something that's already partly developed and carry forward with it. If they're a developer, they'll contribute to it, perhaps. If they're not, they're just putting it to use and they're sharing it. For thinking of a solo flyer out there, and we have a lot of these in our audience, what would be the primary attraction there, and especially where do they go to get the code and start banging on it.
So what's the attraction as a potential contributor?
Yeah.
So changing the way that everybody does internet and online correspondence. This is an opportunity to sort of influence the world. I think it's impossible for email to survive. Something is going to replace it. People have been imagining that something is going to replace email, and since the late 90s, everyone in technology has assumed that websites are the solution to every user problem. So either software as a service over the internet or a web app on the corporate internet. And folks have assumed that web discussion boards or web messaging services would do the trick. But a website is not a network. It's an application. Email is not a service. Email is not a product. Email is a network. To replace email, you have to enable a new network, and that means a protocol. And really no one's actually tried that because of this focus on web technology. And web technology offers a couple of really good protocols, HTTP and HTML, which are wonderful for a great majority of applications, but as it turns out, not for messaging, because you need a dedicated messaging protocol whereby you can assume when your client calls a server that they've never contacted before, that they're speaking the same language. So this is an opportunity to define that protocol to replace email and undermine organized cybercrime. And it's also an opportunity to define the user experience of email, because the other big motivation of this project, after the security issues, is the productivity of email. So everybody understands the burden of that. So for some examples, if both of you guys, or if I started a thread to both of you guys, and you both replied, then how do I forward both of your replies to another party? If I forward either of your messages, it will exclude the other one. Or conversely, if I CC both of you on a message and Doc has no need to be involved in this conversation, suppose I CC'd a whole bunch of people on this thread. Now Doc is going to see all of the replies from all of the people and has no way to get off of that conversation. And then, really importantly, you need to be able to prevent people from sending you stuff when you're not available, because you don't want to have the pressure of going and looking at email when you're trying to do other things. And it's also important for the productivity of people sending stuff. If you're not available, they should be able to consider who else they could contact if they really need to reach somebody at that moment. And so those are some of the burdens of email as we're dealing with it today. And then if you look at email messages versus web technology, email lacks features that have been common on websites for over 20 years. Data collection by forms or surveys, hyperlinks between threads or between messages in the same thread, data-driven charts and graphs, slide decks, and tab layouts. If you're sending someone a lot of information, one of the best ways to do it is to organize it as a slide deck so they can look at the first few slides and decide if they want to keep going, rather than seeing that you sent them a book and decide that they should look at it later. So there's a lot going on in this project, both on the security and the productivity side. There's a lot to satisfy someone. There's a lot to satisfy people with a diverse set of interests. There's a lot of work to do on the user experience, on new features, on the protocol, on security issues. So it's an immense opportunity.
Well, I know Dan has some questions queued up, but first I need to let you all know that this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Linode. Managing your complex cloud infrastructure shouldn't be hard. Linode believes in cloud computing for all. Simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. Why do over 800,000 developers choose Linode? Well, it has an intuitive cloud manager and full-featured API. Linode has data centers around the world with the same simple and consistent pricing, regardless of location. Choose the data center nearest to you. And they have award-winning customer support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, with no tiers or handoffs regardless of your plan size. So think about all the things you can do. Host your website, build your app, store and backup media. It's all up to you. Easily launch and enrich your developer applications, hosted services, websites, AI and machine learning workloads, gaming services, or CI/CD environments. Launch and scale in the cloud with their virtual machines. You can choose shared and dedicated compute instances, or you can use your $100 in credit on S3-compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more. Be sure to check out Linode's new YouTube channel for video tutorials, security tips, and more at youtube.com/Linode. Bryce Adams from Metoric says, "From the start, we were looking for a partner, not a provider. Some of the large providers see us only as a transaction. Linode is the kind of partner that will be with us from the start today and beyond." We also want to congratulate Linode for their multiple Stevie Award wins. Their sales and customer service were awarded for excellence for the third consecutive year. Simplify your infrastructure and cut your cloud bills in half with Linode's Linux virtual machines. Whether you're developing a personal project or managing larger workloads, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions. Get started on Linode today with $100 in free credit for listeners of Floss Weekly. You can find all the details at linode.com/floss. Not at your desktop, simply text TWiT to 474747 to get your free credit. Linode.com/floss and click on the Create Free Account button to get started. If it runs on Linux, it runs on Linode.
So, Liam, we've talked a lot about the motivation behind the project and the philosophy and so on, but I really want to get into some of the kind of techie side of it as well. Sure. I know our audience will be really, the first things they want to know are all about text editors you use and languages and so on. So I was curious that I had a look. This is all written in Go, I think. So what made you choose Go to implement the project?
Well, the leading, I think the leading feature of Go is that it's not terrible.
Okay, yeah, true.
It's a compiled language. Its memory footprint is pretty tight for languages that do garbage collection. It's really quick to learn. I, like most developers, have a sort of a love-hate relationship with the languages that we use, but it works. I wish it worked better on Windows because this is a client application as well as a server application, but it does the job. A lot of the app is also, a lot of the current generation of the app is written in JavaScript because it's the clients are what you would call a localhost web app. So you have a client that runs native on your computer, on your laptop, on your local machine. But it displays its UI in a browser or in a sequence of browser tabs because making a UI in the browser is just really straightforward. So lots of JavaScript and particularly the Vue.js framework the Vue.js framework.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because browsers are on so many devices. Almost any device with an internet connection these days can bring up a browser. I don't know about your internet connected toaster maybe, but we'll get there. But it seems like a really good place to deliver the kind of user interface because everyone can kind of get access to it. And it brings me to something that a lot of people have been asking us actually in relation to this is, I'm sure you get asked this all the time about mobile clients and so on. Is there a plan to bring this to mobile devices as well?
Absolutely, of course, yes. That's one of the things that I'm looking for help on. It's not a problem to port a Go app to a mobile environment, but the UI is another matter. My understanding is that running a web-based UI with a lot of JavaScript on a phone isn't necessarily a great or a really performant experience. So we'll probably resurface the front end with native mobile user interface technology. So the question is, which of those do we use? Do you use the fully native ones on each platform and create a separate skin on each platform, or do you use one of the cross-platform tools? So not something I have much experience with at this point. So it's either keep working on the underlying technologies where I have competence, or mount the learning curve of mobile devices to get a client done there.
And we mentioned before about getting involved. You're on GitHub. You're looking for people to get involved and contribute to the project. So you were saying one of the things. So if there's people listening to this, watching this, who have experience maybe or have developed mobile apps, it sounds like something you could use some contributions for.
Yes, absolutely. And at a higher level, I'm also building a board of advisors, people with both technical and market and networking experience. Basically, the whole range of abilities that you would need to build a business. But since we're not hiring employees and raising venture capital, we're soliciting people to join a board of advisors and contribute a modest amount of time every month to building the project and the community.
Excellent. And we talked a bit about the client and so on. So on the server side, obviously you've got your server element as well. I was looking on the repositories there on GitHub and so on about what's needed to run it and so on. If someone listening to this thinks, I want to set up a MNM server, what kind of things do they need? Is there any special requirements, or will it run on like commodity hosting or so on?
So it's trivial to set up. The current release supports Linux, but you should be able to compile it in Go for any Unix environment. Eventually, of course, we'll support Windows. That just needs a little bit of tweaking, since Go doesn't quite bend over backwards to enable seamless porting between Linux and Windows, because it is somewhat tricky. But I ported I build the client application on Linux, test it on Linux, and then port it to Windows and Mac. And it's, once you've done a couple of background things, it's pretty easy. So no special requirements. We have a sort of a stress test that we run on the server that simulates 1,000 clients connecting and disconnecting and sending a pretty good volume of messages through it. And 1,000 concurrent clients uses like 100 megabytes of RAM. So it's quite parsimonious, and there are no runtime requirements. There's no runtime dependencies, and there's no external database. We just use the file system. So it's very simple download, launch, or download, configure, launch. So you have to configure a network time server so that the server can use the time in its ID generation.
So tell us about, I think you mentioned it, the protocol TMTP. Tell us about why that and what that's like, and does that require any further development, any expansions or whatever? I'm not familiar with it, so might be worth asking.
It does require some more work. Let me tell you a little bit about how MNM how you get started with MNM. So that'll give you a sense of what we need in the protocol. So MNM is members only. So you register at a site and you choose an alias. The alias is the name that people know you by. The service approves your alias or rejects it and asks you to choose another one, and then generates an ID and a password. The ID and password are long random strings. So the protocol has to support registration and aliases separate from IDs. It also importantly lets you or requires that you send an invite to someone's alias in order to establish contact with them. You can't just send them any content right off the bat. An invitation is a very short plain text message, basically saying why you want to establish contact with them. So you also have accounts on several different sites, which the demo shows. And these different sites will have different membership criteria. So the protocol has to take all this into account. And email protocol just, when you set up a server, it just accepts messages from essentially anywhere. Now, nowadays, people set up whitelists if they want to receive messages from sort of a narrow range of senders. For instance, on your corporate network, you might set up a whitelist with other people, like the other email servers in your corporation. But for public internet email, you're basically open to anybody. But MNM says no. We want the users to agree to correspond with each other. So I send you an invite, and at that point, you can then send me any length message or a message with attachments. And if you choose to respond to my invite, I then can send a reply with any content. And then just like on all the messaging services that have arisen recently, if you decide to block someone, no problem.
So you've got a kind of your own ceremony there. I'm not sure that's the right word, but it sounds like a behavioral protocols that people will go through in order to set this up. It sounds a little to me like some of what one goes through with a messaging platform for the first time. Is it like that, or do you want to outline the differences?
Yeah, on most messaging platforms, you exchange, I friend you, and then you accept a friendship. In MNM, when I send you an invite, you can immediately turn around and send me a long message. You don't have to exchange invitations in order to establish contact. The first invitation can establish contact if the recipient chooses to allow it. One way that MNM differs from messaging services, a messaging service is basically one site. MNM is a network of sites. So as in the demo, you're going to have a site for internal communications, and maybe a site for communications with your customers, a site for business-to-business exchange, maybe your favorite brands, your hobbies and interests. You might have a few tens of sites. And each of these sites will give you a separate inbox, which is important. If someone is trying to impersonate your manager and their name, their assumed name appears in your work inbox, then your first reaction is, oh, my manager's calling. I better pay attention to this. So MNM keeps your separate accounts in separate inboxes. And if you want to see a mashup of inboxes, you can do a search and then get a subset of your inboxes in a single list. So
one of the things I was interested in, Liam, when I was looking at this, I mentioned it earlier on about the idea of kind of flipping the email thing on its head, in that you don't have a server with all, a repository with all your messages on that the clients are then interacting with. It's kind of every client maintains its own copies of the messages, and
right.
And they're not sitting on the server. One of the things I was curious about though is they're mostly text-based messages, and you can put images in, and there's other things as well with Markdown, of course. But does that create a lot? Is that going to use a lot of space? Would I have like an archive of, say, my last 1,000 messages on every device that I use this on?
Yes. So saving space for messages that have long since been read and stopped interacting with is pretty straightforward. You just do compression. The hard drive that you find on your laptop, or the flash chip in your mobile phone, these have immense amounts of storage, and adding a SIM card, or not a SIM card, adding an SD card is really easy. So yes, the clients keep all of the messages. It's important not to make the server a target. If the server has all of the message history for everyone in your organization going back years or decades, it's an extremely valuable target. If the server is just relaying stuff on behalf of the clients and letting it go after delivery, then the server is a much less valuable target. It's easier to protect the clients, and it's easy to disinherit or deactivate a client that you've lost or that's been stolen. There's already plenty of solutions for mobile device management out there that do that today. So yes, over a period of a decade, a lot of email and attachments would accumulate on your device, but over the same decade, storage densities will continue to improve, and as I said, we can compress the stuff you're not interacting with anymore, and most of it is indeed text, which compresses really well.
That does make a lot of sense. The other thing I was curious about was the synchronization of it all. So say I've got a client set of 3 different client devices. If they've all got copies of the messages, and then I reply to one, or I mark one, delete one. Let's say I delete a message off one of my devices. Does it then tell the server to tell the other clients to delete that message? How does it kind of sync up?
Yes, exactly. So we don't assume that the clients can necessarily reach each other. So the clients. It's easy, for example, to replicate my laptop MNM repository to my phone, assuming that we have a phone client, which we will. So that's just a straightforward peer-to-peer data transfer. But after that, the server, yes, keeps your clients in sync. The changes that you make to your data set on one client get passed through the server to all the other clients.
Mm-hmm. So could you use something like Git, or in a similar way, to kind of sync those repositories? Because when you said about the message repository, it just made me think of it. You could almost use version control across all the devices to make sure that they're kind of way.
Well, sure, yes. Git isn't known for its durability in the face of a crash. I've experienced, being in the process of some Git operation, and the system just went down on me, and I couldn't actually figure out how to restore my Git repository. I had to pull from the server and start over. So MNM's client is built specifically with the data integrity in the face of a crash. And this is really actually difficult to do if you're using a database that's all handled behind the scenes. But I wanted the MNM data set to be user viewable and user editable. So, if you have a problem on your system, using Microsoft Office or using Linux, you call up your expert friend. Hey, this isn't working. What do I do? And on Linux, for instance, all the configuration files are in text. Well, in MNM, all of the data files are in text. So if something goes wrong, there's some kind of data corruption or there's a bug in the app, heaven forbid, your smart friend can look at your data files in text and fix that. So that's why we went with data files, and then using data files correctly in a reliable way is actually somewhat of a challenge. So MNM pays particular attention to building transactions in the file system.
So we're now down to the end of our hour, or very close to it, and we typically end with four quick questions. The first is there any question we haven't asked that you'd like to answer, or ask and answer, hopefully briefly?
Sure. So let's see. People ask about end-to-end encryption. This is a hot topic. End-to-end encryption is where your message is encrypted by the sender and decrypted by the receiver. And that's a particularly important technology for SMTP, where your message or your email message is bouncing through potentially multiple servers, which could each read it. But in CMTP, you're going direct over a secure link, TLS, to the server in question. And depending on the function of that server, they may have a legitimate need to do analysis or archiving of the data. So I think that end-to-end encryption is important in some examples, or in some cases like journalism. Journalists need to have secure communications. But outside of that, it's not a very large market. So we will have end-to-end encryption basically guided by input from the board of advisors and our contributors. But it's end-to-end encryption is not in the preview that's there now.
So here's a question. It's our control question we ask every guest, which is, do you have anything to say about blockchain?
No, I don't have anything to say about blockchain.
Good answer.
That's good. Yeah, it is a good answer. And that is brief. And the last two, what are your favorite text editors and scripting language?
I don't have a favorite text editor. I use Bash for scripting.
Excellent. Well, this has been a great hour, and I really appreciate your being with us, Liam. And I hope among our many listeners that some jump on board and help you out with this thing. Join your advisory board, write some code, go to GitHub and start banging on it. I think you've got a really brilliant alternative take on the way we can communicate. And you're right.
Thank you.
Email as we know it has been kind of stale for a long time. So, thanks so much.
Stale, now it's toxic.
Yeah, it's a great point. So thanks again so much. Appreciate you being with us. So Dan, how'd that go for you, dude?
Hey, yeah, really, really interesting. I think, as you just said, basically, there is a need for alternatives to email now. I mean, it's kind of, it's so old now that it doesn't really fit the world that we live in right now. It was kind of designed for a different age, in a different age. And it's interesting. I really like the kind of philosophy behind what Liam's trying to do. I think, it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I think there's a lot of work still to do on it, as there is on so many other things. But it'll be really nice to see where they go with it. And as you said, hopefully see some of the listeners and audience of the show go and try it out and get involved and help them to kind of develop a new alternative over there.
It's interesting to me personally because I've kind of got the same attitude toward the browser that he has toward email. I feel like the browser itself has become this operating system that we've laid on top of all the other operating systems, and we're operating entirely inside of it and can't think outside that box. If it can't be done in a browser, it's not worth doing. And especially when, as Liam was talking about, a lot of what happens in mobile is taking something, doing something in WebKit in mobile, and you're still sort of caught in the browser view there, even if you're in separate apps. And it's a long road. I think it's a long road either way. Status quos are rather massive, even if they are toxic. But I think it's a noble and really good effort that he's putting on there. And I hope our viewers and listeners jump on it and give him a hand with it. Yeah,
definitely.
So what have you got to plug, dude?
What have I got to plug? Just head to my website if you want to find out anything that I'm doing at the moment, such as podcasts and other things. If you go to danlynch.org, you'll find it on there. And there you go. We've hopefully I'm getting my things wrong because my picture's reversed, but he's helpfully for the people viewing put it on the screen now. But it is danlynch.org, and and it's quite a plain looking website. He's now showing me up. My web design is not fantastic, but there we go. Just head over there. You can find that. You can find links to my Twitter and so on, which is, and music and all kinds of random stuff. I keep promising I'm going to start updating the blog again more regularly, but as a friend once said to me, blogs are difficult. They're kind of like muscles. You have to keep lifting those weights to keep them up. And I've been slacking a bit, so I need to get onto some writing, I think.
Tell me about it. I've been on blogging since the 90s, and I'm not sure I'm any more muscular than I was back then. I'm spread thinner. Two of them were actually down yesterday, possibly because some email thing happened. I don't know. In any case, this has been great. I appreciate it a lot, Dan, and thank you, audience, for being with us for another week of Floss Weekly. We'll see you again next week. Let me check real quickly and see what we've got on. I should know, but I don't. I always need to cue that up. It'll be good. It's always good. So thanks a lot, everybody. This has been Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and we'll see you again.
Hold on. Let's do that again. Okay.
Take it from where?
Mr. John Murtick. That's our guest next week. Risk 5. So.
Oh, to John Murtick and Risk 5. Okay.
Yeah. So let's tease next week so we can start from there.
Okay. Our guest next week is going to be John Murtick of Risk 5, a topic we've talked about a number of times already on earlier Floss Weeklies. It's a big one, and we'll see you then next week.
Hope you enjoyed that episode. If you would like to laugh while learning about how to take control and take advantage of all of the features that your iOS devices provide, then you should check out iOS Today. The show Rosemary Orchard, my co-host, and I, Micah Sargent, host every week on the TWiT network. It's all things Apple all the time.